Hi, welcome back to the shed for episode 39 of GGBO 2023, and in this episode we finally get to put some colour onto this guitar. In the last episode we spent an absolute age sanding and getting everything ready. We also did the grain filling on these mahogany sections of the back and around the perimeter of the guitar. So that's all ready to go, and in this episode we're going to concentrate on getting all of the staining done. This really could be a make or break moment on this build, but I really do think that this isn't working for me. It just looks too anemic and pale, so we need to do something with it. I did think about going really extreme with a wild colour on this, but I think there's enough going on with the stripes in the central section and everything, so I don't think we need to go too mad with it, but I do think it needs a little bit of a lift just to give it a bit of a pop. But before I get onto that, there's one thing I did forget to do in the last episode, and it's something I always like to do, and that's to put a little bit of a countersink around any holes where finish is going to go. And I do that because it just helps break that corner a little bit, so when you're flatting, you're not going to break through the finish quite as easily as you would. And it doesn't need to be much, it's just a very quick just to chamfer that corner round, and just give it a little bit of a clean up there with a bit of paper, just to get any little loose fibres off there. And I also need to head up to the headstock end to do that on the tuner holes too. Okay, and with that out of the way, we can now start on some of the staining work. You can probably see I've got some gloves on just to keep it off my skin as best I can. Now I'm going to start on the back of the neck, and there's a really good reason for doing that. The back of the neck, I've got plenty of material, and if I put this stain on and realise that I absolutely hate it, I can let it dry and I can sand it back and I can think of what I'm going to do next. I can't do that on the veneer on the front. I don't think there's enough scope to sand it out, so that would be a one-time shot. And I'm going to start off, I think the back element of the guitar, I just need to do amber. I don't think there's any need for too much complexity. And I'm just going to wipe the neck down ever so slightly with a damp tissue, just a bit of water, just to try and even out the application of this stain. And I think that looks fine. Actually, I'm very pleased with that. I think it's a little bit darker than it will be once it dries. I did a little sample before and that's gone. If anything, it's a little bit browner, but I do think this is darker than that will dry. So I'm just going to repeat that on the headstock. So I'll just wet that down with a damp shop towel again, and then we'll just add that stain. And with that done up to that point, I'm just going to again take the damp towel and give it a quick rub. I just think that helps kind of even it out a little bit. And two things here, I think the colour's much better than the plain maple colour, and it's also kind of made the figure in the neck pop a little bit, which is also nice. So I'll get set up and I'm going to do exactly the same trick to the centre section of the back of the body. And I'll just very quickly mask that up just to keep the stain off the mahogany bits. I'm just going to repeat the process. Bit of water first. Doesn't need to be a lot. And we'll just bang the stain on. This little recess is going to be difficult to do. I'm just going to try and do the lip. I'm not going to go right the way into there. Don't think that's really necessary, but elements of the lip might be visible from outside once the cover's in place. But it is a bit of a swine. I might need to just go and get a little bit of a paintbrush and just touch that area in. But I'm also going to kind of drop that cover in place and stain that in situ. And I'll just even that all out with the damp tissue. And that's the first coat of stain on. I'm going to leave that now for probably an hour just for everything to dry out, and then I can kind of properly assess the colour once that's happened. It might need a second coat. It might actually need a little bit of a nibbing down just to take that colour back a little bit, but it's really difficult to tell until it's dried. Okay, so I've let this sit for about an hour and a half now, and it's nice and dry. You can feel that adding that stain has raised the grain a little bit, so we need to do something about that. I think it's dried a little bit lighter in colour, but I think I can make it just that little bit better. And what I'm going to do is I've got some fine wire wool. And I'm just going to take a little bit of that and just give that a quick buff. And that's both kind of smoothed off that raised grain again, and I think it's also kind of evened out the staining, made it look a lot more consistent and equal. So I think that's looking very nice now, much happier. So that's the back, kind of sorted out. I'm a little bit dubious about some of this around here. I might have to kind of come back to that and give it a bit of a sand down and restain it. I don't know. I think it's just the grain in the wood has absorbed a little bit more stain, but it looks a tiny little bit blotchy. So we might have to come back to that bit, but I'm going to turn it over and we're going to start looking at this front. And to say I'm a little bit nervous would be an understatement. This is potentially a massive point of failure just waiting for me, but fortune favours the brave and all that, so we're going to go for it. I'm just going to start off by getting a little bit of masking onto the fretboard where it meets up with the body, just to keep the bulk of the stain off there. And again, it's going to be a case of dampen it slightly, add the stain, let it all dry, just come back and clean it all up with the wire wool like I did on the back. So I'm going to do this in stages with the amber. I'll do this bottom area, and I'll come to the middle, and then I'll do the top. I'm not going to pay too much attention to either of these routes because I'm thinking I might just black the inside of those out just to kind of give everything a neater look, and I can use shielding paint to do that. I've also got some thin neoprene rubber sheeting that I might put in the back area of this route just to cushion the tremolo if I ever kind of pull it upwards. So, like I say, I'll start by just putting a bit of moisture on there. And even that's kind of popped that very nicely. And then we'll just add a little bit of that amber. Now it could very well be the case that as I'm working through this, adding the stains and stuff, I'll look at it and go, yep, that's it. That's the look I'm after. I don't think we've reached that yet, but just adding that little bit of stain from where I'm standing has really, really made a massive difference to the look of that lower bout. So you can just get some on the central section. This is actually quite difficult because there's some really small bits and it's just hard to get kind of consistent coverage. But I think that actually looks okay. And just finish off this top section. Now I don't know how obvious that is from the angle that we've got, but from where I'm standing that has really, really popped the figure in that maple veneer. I think once we get a bit of lacquer on there it's going to look really nice. So I'm just going to give that a wipe down, bit of water, just to try and blend it a little bit. And then we can leave that again to dry out and see what we think. Okay, so I've left that to dry up. I actually left it a day or so because I was busy doing other stuff, and I actually think that's looking really nice. I've already given it a rub down with the wire wool, and that has taken quite a bit of that stain off and left it a really nice subtle light amber colour. And one part of my head is saying quit while you're winning. That actually looks quite nice, and once you get some lacquer on it'll look absolutely fine. While another part of my brain is saying no guts, no glory. So I think I'm going to go for the burst effect, but I'm going to start on the headstock because that's a smaller area, and if I decide I don't like it I can quite easily sand that back and redo it. So we'll nip up the other end of the guitar and we'll see what we can get done with those other two colours of stain. And I'm going to start with a little bit of the mango stain. All of these stains, by the way, are from Crimson Guitars. They are their Stunning Stains range. I've used these a fair bit in the past and I've always enjoyed them. Some people don't particularly like water-based stains. I, to be honest, quite like using them. So again, I'm just going to give that a light spritz with a bit of water, just to hopefully even up the application. And I'm just going to put a bit of an edge round. Like that. And I'm going to go straight on with the second colour as well. And this is going to be just a very, very delicate little edge. So a very thin trace around there. Just going to blob a little bit along that line where it meets the nut. Now I'm going to leave that just for a couple of minutes, just to dry up a little bit, and then I'll just take an ever so slight damp tissue and just give that a little bit of a blend in. But actually, I like that. I think that's the right choice. It's very subtle, it's quite delicate, but I think it's going to look nice. Okay, so that's had a few minutes just to kind of settle down a little bit. So just take a slightly moistened tissue, and I'm just going to kind of try and blend that a little bit, just to take that harsh line out if I can. And I think that looks a lot nicer now. So obviously this is quite a bit darker now because it's wet, basically, both with the stain and the water. So I'm going to leave that for a little while just to kind of dry up a little bit. And then if it is still a little bit too dark for my liking, I can again take the wire wool and just give that a little bit of a rub just to bring it back up. But with that established as something that I think is going to work, we can now go back and see if we can replicate that on the body. However, this time I'm going to try and do this in two bits. I'll do the bottom half and the top half, just so I'm not trying to do too much at one time. Again, start with the mango. Now that looks quite dark and it looks like quite a lot of coverage, but I'm confident most of that is just the wetness of the water and the actual stain. And once it dries out, we'll have a much more subtle burst effect. So again, I'm just going to go straight in with this blood orange stain. And again, I'll just give that a few minutes to dry out a little bit, and we'll hit it with the damp tissue and just do a little bit of blending. And I think that's blended that quite nicely, but I also think it's taken out quite a bit of the colour. So I'm just going to go back round again and just add a very thin strip of that blood orange on the very, very edge, which can then be blended a second time, and hopefully that will give us the effect that we're after. Okay, so I actually made this burst a bit more pronounced before I finished last night. It just didn't look right being so thin, so I've added a little bit more depth to the burst, and I've given most of it a kind of a bit of a rub off with the wire wool just to blend it in. I haven't done this corner here, so I'm just going to kind of have a go at that. Just remove a little bit of the edge colour. And I actually think that that looks really nice. What I have noticed with these water-based stains in the past is that they actually look quite washed out and almost like pastel colour when it's just the stained wood. But once you get that first coat of lacquer on there, they really pop and they really darken off. So I'm anxious that I don't want to make this too dark. So I think I'm just about there with this. I might just continue to kind of blend things a little bit better. But on the whole, I think that's pretty much where we need it to be. And you might not be able to see it in these shots too clearly, but it is really starting to make the figure in this veneer pop with the colour on. And I anticipate that when I get the first coats of lacquer onto this, it really is going to spark up and look absolutely beautiful. But I think we're pretty much where we need to be with this one now. So I'm going to leave this video here. So I'll be back in a couple of days' time where we'll get this hung up, get the spray gun out and start to get some clear on it. Until then, don't forget to hit that like button if you've enjoyed this. Subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.